Quetzalcoatl, the god who promised a golden return and delivered an apocalypse. There are names that echo through the canyons of time. Names whispered in the ruins of forgotten empires, carved into the bones of the world itself. Gilgamesh, Osiris, Beowulf. But among these titans of myth, there is one whose story is a paradox woven from light and shadow, creation and annihilation. His is a name that signifies both the pinnacle of civilization and the catalyst for its utter destruction. He is the breath of life and the morning star, the god of knowledge who gifted humanity with science, art, and the calendar. He is the priest-king who forbade the bloody stain of human sacrifice and presided over a golden age. He is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. But this is not simply a tale of a benevolent deity, for within the legend of Quetzalcoatl lies a darker, more terrible promise. A story of betrayal, exile, and a prophecy of return. A prophecy that, when it was finally fulfilled, did not usher in a new dawn, but a long and brutal night from which an entire world would never awaken. This is the story of how the promise of a god's return became the blueprint for an empire's demise. A tale of fatal misunderstanding, of cosmic irony, and of a bloody homecoming that forever changed the face of our world. Join us as we open the archives of the Eldritch Codex to unravel the myth and the tragedy of the feathered serpent who promised a glorious return and delivered an apocalypse. In the silent theater of the cosmos, before the ticking of any clock we would recognize, there was not one creation, but a succession of them. The great civilizations of ancient Mesoamerica, Toltec, the Aztec, the Maya did not perceive time as a straight arrow fired into the future. They saw it as a great wheel, a series of immense cyclical ages they called suns. Each sun was a universe unto itself, a divine experiment in creation, presided over by a god, and each in its turn was destined for annihilation. First came the son of the jaguar, an age of giants who roamed a twilight earth. Theirs was a world of brute strength, but it was not to last. They were devoured by celestial jaguars, and their sun was extinguished. Then came the son of wind, a world swept clean by hurricanes of divine fury, its people transformed into monkeys clinging to the last remaining trees. The third son was a son of fiery rain, a world consumed by a celestial inferno that fell from the heavens, turning all to ash. The fourth, the son of water, was drowned beneath a silent, world-spanning flood, its inhabitants becoming fish in the dark and endless sea. 4 times the gods had tried. 4 times the world had been born. And 4 times it had been unmade in spectacular and terrible fashion. Now after the last great flood, there was only a void. A dark, waterlogged sky hung over a formless earth. The age of the fourth sun was over. The cosmos was waiting. Out of this primordial state, from the very essence of the dual god Omedeath, god of polarity, both masculine and feminine, order and chaos, 4 creator gods were born to shape the next reality. They were the red Tezcatlipoca, known as Zyptotec, the blue Tezcatlipoca, the fearsome war god Huitzilopochtli, the black Tezcatlipoca, the lord of the night and sorcery, and the white Tezcatlipoca being who would be known by another name entirely. For at the heart of this new cosmic drama stood 2 of these brothers, locked in an eternal, magnificent rivalry. They were the twin poles of creation, the light and the shadow whose divine conflict would serve as the very engine of the universe. One was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His name, his very form, is a profound philosophical statement. Coatl, the serpent, a creature bound to the earth, a symbol of the soil, the waters, and the underworld. And Quetzali, the shimmering green tail feathers of the sacred Quetzal bird, a creature of the heavens, a symbol of the sky, the wind, and the preciousness of life itself. He was the god of the dawn, of mercy, of wisdom. He was the breath of life that stirs the leaves, the morning star that guides the sun. He was order, civilization, and knowledge made manifest. And his brother, his shadow, his eternal adversary was Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, lord of the night sky, master of sorcery, discord, and fate. Where Quetzalcoatl offered clarity, Tezcatlipoca was ambiguity and illusion. Where Quetzalcoatl built, Tezcatlipoca tested, tempted, and destroyed. He was the god of hurricanes and war, the patron of sorcerers and warriors, the unpredictable, untamable power of the wilderness and the darkness between the stars. Their struggle was not one of simple good versus evil. It was the necessary cosmic dance between structure and chaos, from which all existence is woven. To bring forth a new world, a new sun was needed. 5th Sunday. The gods gathered at the sacred, ancient city of Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the gods. There they built a colossal sacrificial fire. 2 gods volunteered to immolate themselves to become the new celestial bodies. After a moment of hesitation from a wealthy god, it was a humble, pockmarked deity, Nanahuatzin, who bravely leaped into the divine flames, transforming into the new, brilliant sun. The other followed, becoming the moon. The 5th sun now hung in the sky, but it was a sun that shone upon nothing. The world was lit, but it was lifeless. A silent, barren stage upon which no story could unfold. The bones of the previous humanity lay in the deepest layer of the underworld, lost and forgotten. The other gods were resigned to this empty creation. But Quetzalcoatl, the giver of breath and life, could not abide a silent world. He who had brought forth knowledge would not accept a world without people to receive it. He made a decision of staggering audacity. He would undertake the most perilous journey imaginable. He would descend into Mictlan, the land of the dead. Mictlan was not a place of punishment, but one of absolute finality. A 9-layered labyrinth of shadow and despair, from which no soul, mortal or divine, was ever meant to return. Each layer presented a new soul-crushing trial. Crossing mountains that crashed together, traversing plains where winds were sharp as obsidian knives, swimming rivers of blood and pus. It was a kingdom of bone and echoing silence, ruled by its grim monarch Mictlantecuhtli, the lord of the dead, and his consort Mictekisituatl. Quetzalcoatl journeyed through the 9 hells, his divine presence a stark contrast to the gloom. He finally arrived before the throne of bone, facing the lord of the dead himself, a fearsome entity of exposed sinew and skeletal flesh, his liver hanging from his chest, his eyes cold pits of obsidian. Quetzalcoatl announced his purpose. He had come to gather the precious relics, the sacred bones of the past generations, to populate the new world above. Mictlantecuhtli, a god of grim finality and grim humor, regarded him with suspicion. He would not surrender his treasure so easily. He presented Quetzalcoatl with a challenge, a seemingly impossible task designed to ensure his failure. You may take the bones, the lord of the dead rasped, but only if you can travel 4 times around my throne, sounding this trumpet as you go. He presented Quetzalcoatl with a magnificent conch shell. But it was a trick. The shell had no finger holes. It was impossible to play. Failure meant an eternity trapped in Mictlan. But Quetzalcoatl was not a god of brute force. He was a god of ingenuity and wisdom. He looked at the impossible shell, and instead of despairing, he summoned aid from the small creatures of the world. He called forth worms which crawled into the conch and drilled the necessary holes from the inside. Then he summoned hornets and bees, which flew into the shell, and their furious buzzing filled it with a deep, resonant hum, a sound that mimicked a trumpet's roar. The sound echoed through the 9 layers of the underworld. Mictlantecuhtli was stunned and angered, but bound by his word. Reluctantly, he allowed Quetzalcoatl to enter his bone-strewn vaults and gather the precious cargo. Quetzalcoatl collected the skeletons, male and female, bundling them together in a sacred cloak. His quest was a success. But the Lord of the Dead was treacherous. As Quetzalcoatl began his hurried ascent back to the world of the living, Mictlantecuhtli commanded his demonic minions, the Micteca, to dig a pit in his path. As Quetzalcoatl ran, a flight of quail servants of the underworld were sent to startle him. He stumbled, tripped, and fell headlong into the hidden trap. Catastrophe. The sacred bones, the hope of a new world, lay shattered into countless pieces of varying sizes. The quail descended and began to gnaw upon them. In agony and shame, Quetzalcoatl wept. "What shall I do?" he cried. "My venture has failed." But his spirit was not broken. Painstakingly, he gathered every last broken fragment, every shard and splinter of bone. He bundled the shattered remains, and though his heart was heavy with his failure, he completed his escape from the underworld, emerging back into the world of light. He brought the broken bones to Tamuanshan, the paradise where the gods dwelt. There the other deities gathered. The goddess Siwakotl, the serpent woman, ground the broken, gnawed upon bones on a sacred stone, mixing them into a fine gray powder, like corn meal. The vessel was now prepared, but it lacked the spark of life. And here Quetzalcoatl performed his ultimate, most intimate act of creation. The other gods stood witness as he took a sharpened point of jade and pierced his own divine flesh. He bled upon the ground bones. His own sacred blood, his life-giving essence, his tonality, dripped into the lifeless powder, imbuing it with divine energy. From this mixture of shattered past and divine sacrifice, humanity was born. And in this origin lies the profound truth. We are born of broken things, made whole only by the self-sacrifice of a god. This is why the peoples of Mesoamerica owed a blood debt to the gods, not as a demand for slaughter, but as an acknowledgement of the blood that was shed to give them life in the first place. And it explains our mortal imperfect nature. We were fashioned from bones that were shattered and broken. But Quetzalcoatl did not abandon his fragile new creation. His work had only just begun. He became their teacher, their guide, their great civilizer. He taught them how to track the stars and create calendars of astonishing complexity. He taught them the arts of polishing jade and weaving cotton. And most precious of all, he gave them the gift that would become the very foundation of their civilization: maize. To acquire it, legend says he transformed himself into a black ant, squeezing through a crack in the celestial mountain of sustenance to steal a single grain of corn to bring back to his people. He was the patron of priests, the inventor of books, the force that brought order from the chaos of the new world. He was the promise of a world guided by wisdom, not by bloodshed, a world of art, science, and peace. And for a time, in a shining city of legend, that promise was made real. Myth and history are not always separate streams. Sometimes they flow together, carving a single, grand canyon through time, where the divine walks in the flesh and legends are etched into the stone of reality. The cosmic Quetzalcoatl, the creator god who bled for humanity, now descends from the celestial plane to our own. He takes on a mortal name, a human face, and a throne on earth. He becomes Quetzalcoatl. Our Lord, one reed, the feathered serpent. He is no longer just a god in a distant pantheon, he is a priest king, the historical ruler of a city that will become the benchmark for paradise itself, the legendary Talin. In the annals of Mesoamerica, Talin is not merely a place, it is an ideal. For the later Aztec Empire, who looked back upon the Toltecs as we might look back upon the Romans or the Greeks, Talin was a lost golden age, a utopia that shimmered in their collective memory. The chronicles, woven from history and poetic hyperbole, paint a picture of a civilization at its absolute zenith, all under the wise and benevolent guidance of its feathered serpent king. The stories told of a city where nature itself bent to the will of this benevolent ruler. The cobs of maize grew so immense that a single man struggled to carry one. The amaranth stalks were as tall as trees. But most wondrous of all was the cotton. It required no dye, for it bloomed from the earth in a symphony of brilliant, natural colors: rich scarlet, vibrant yellow, deep indigo, and shimmering gold. To wear the clothes of Talin was to be robed in the unprocessed splendor of the earth. The palaces of Talin were said to be architectural marvels, halls built not of common stone, but of jade, of shimmering turquoise, of red and white seashell, and even of precious quetzal feathers themselves. The people who inhabited this city, the Tolteca, were not just citizens. Their very name became synonymous with master craftsman or artisan. They were architects, astronomers, physicians, and artists of unparalleled skill, their every creation imbued with the spirit of their wise king. The famous Atlantean statues that still stand guard at Tula today are a silent, stone testament to their formidable artistry. Colossal warrior figures, serene and powerful, guardians of a forgotten glory. Under Quetzalcoatl's rule, Talin became the heart of knowledge. He was the living embodiment of the Kalmakak, the priestly school of higher learning. He guided his people in charting the movements of the morning star he was destined to become. He perfected the calendar, turning the passage of time into a sacred science. Talin was a city that celebrated the intellect, a kingdom that ruled not with the edge of the obsidian sword, the Macuahuitl, but with the power of wisdom and understanding. But the most profound and revolutionary aspect of Quetzalcoatl's reign was a philosophy that struck at the very heart of Mesoamerican cosmology. In a world where many cultures believed the gods demanded a constant payment of human blood to keep the cosmos in balance, Quetzalcoatl abhorred the practice of human sacrifice. He taught that the gods did not hunger for the torn-out hearts of men. Such offerings were a barbaric stain on the spirit. Instead, he preached that the divine powers desired offerings of a different kind. He taught his priests to offer jade, the symbol of life, to offer snakes and butterflies, symbols of transformation, to offer fragrant copal incense, its smoke carrying prayers to the heavens. The greatest sacrifice, he declared, was not the life of another, but one of personal penance, fasting, prayer, and the constant effort of self-improvement. He sought to build a civilization nourished by devotion, not by death. Talin was more than a capital city. It was a waking dream. It was the material manifestation of Quetzalcoatl's promise, proof that humanity, his own flawed creation forged from broken bones, could achieve a state of grace on earth. It was a paradise built on knowledge, art, and a profound respect for life. Quetzalcoatl was its serene and sacred heart, the priest king who had led his people into the light. But light, no matter how brilliant, must always cast a shadow. And paradise, as it so often is in the great tragedies of the world, is a fragile thing. Its perfection is an affront to the forces of chaos and darkness. In the divine realm, an ancient rival watched this flawless city with a burning jealous eye. The smoking mirror Tezcatlipoca could not abide this world of perfect order. His very nature demanded strife, temptation, and sacrifice. The peace of Talin was a discordant note in his cosmic symphony. The golden age of the feathered serpent had reached its beautiful sun-drenched peak. And now from the shadows a dark god began to plot its fall. The laughter of a dark god was beginning to echo in the perfect silence of paradise. The downfall of a great man or a god made mortal rarely comes from the thunder of 1,000 marching feet or the breach of a city wall. It arrives as a whisper, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile soil of the mind. It is a slow poison administered not to the body but to the soul. For in the perfect city of Talin, the enemy was not at the gates. He was walking through them in disguise, a phantom of chaos cloaked in a pleasing form. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the eternal adversary, knew this with every fiber of his divine being. He would not shatter Talin with earthquakes or hurricanes, that was too crude. He would dismantle it from the inside out, by breaking its heart, its king. He resolved to destroy the idea of perfection by proving that its champion, Quetzalcoatl, was as flawed and corruptible as any mortal. The chronicles say he came in many forms, a master of illusion. He appeared as a charismatic merchant, a fearsome warrior, a purveyor of strange potions. In the most enduring version of the tale, he approached the court of the priest king disguised as a humble, wizened old man. He requested an audience with the king, claiming he had a gift of profound importance, a tool that would grant the great ruler a new and necessary kind of knowledge of himself. Intrigued, Quetzalcoatl granted the audience. The old sorcerer shuffled forward and from beneath his cloak, he produced an object. It was a mirror, but not one of polished metal. It was a slab of pure, volcanic obsidian, one side polished to a dark, liquid black, the other swirling with the chaotic, smoky nebula within its depths. It was his namesake, the smoking mirror. My great lord, the trickster god rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. You have given so much to your people, but have you ever truly seen yourself? Look upon your own face and know your own form. Quetzalcoatl, a being who had lived a life of ascetic purity focused on the spirit to the near exclusion of the flesh, gazed into the dark glass. But the mirror did not reflect his reality, it reflected Tezcatlipoca's version of it. It stripped away the divine aura and showed him only the frail, decaying vessel of his mortality. He saw not a king, but a haggard creature, weak and ugly. He was horrified. This was Tezcatlipoca's first, masterfully cruel surgical blow against the king's piety, replacing it with the poison of vanity and shame. Recoiling from the image, he cried out, "How can I let my subjects see me in this state? My appearance will frighten them away. I must hide myself from the eyes of my people." He had taken the bait. The seed of shame was planted. Seeing the crack in the king's immaculate spirit, Tezcatlipoca pressed his advantage. He feigned sympathy. "Ah, my lord, do not despair. This is but a temporary affliction. I possess a medicine, a balm that will soothe your spirit and restore your strength and vigor. A drink that will make your heart glad and your flesh young again." The king's attendants and priests were immediately wary. Their lord was a paragon of discipline. Sobriety was a sacred tenet of his rule. But Tezcatlipoca was a master of persuasion. He cajoled, he flattered, he challenged. He insisted it was not a mere intoxicant, but a sacred elixir, a gift from the earth goddess herself. "Just one small taste to honor the offer, my king," he urged. 5 sips for the 5 directions of the cosmos. Torn between his shame and his principles, Quetzalcoatl finally relented. He would take but one taste. He raised the cup to his lips and drank. The pulque was cool and sweet. It felt good. "What is this?" he asked. "It refreshes me." Tezcatlipoca smiled. "Drink more, my lord. It will refresh you further." And so he drank again. And again. The 5 symbolic sips became a torrent. The discipline of a lifetime, the clarity of a divine mind, was washed away in a flood of alcohol. The world around Quetzalcoatl began to swim, to lose its sharp edges. For the first time, the great priest king was drunk. And in this state of profound vulnerability, Tezcatlipoca's plan entered its final, most devastating stage. With Quetzalcoatl's reason drowned in pulque, the trickster god brought forth the king's own sister, the high priestess Quetzalcoatl, a woman as sacred and celibate as he. In his stupor, lost to all piety, shame, and divine law, the king committed the ultimate, unthinkable transgression. He broke his vow of celibacy and lay with his own sister, a sacrilegious act of incest that shattered the sacred bond of his office, defiled his family, and polluted the spiritual heart of Tallinn itself. The sun rose the next morning over Tallinn, its light cutting through the windows of the royal palace. And as the light returned to the world, so too did clarity return to the mind of Quetzalcoatl, chasing away the fog of intoxication. With that clarity came a shame so vast, so profound, it was a physical weight that crushed his soul. He, the lawgiver, had become a lawbreaker. He, the teacher of virtue, had wallowed in vice. He, the symbol of purity, had defiled his own kin. In one night of weakness, masterfully engineered by his divine nemesis, he had undone a lifetime of perfection. The faint, mocking laughter of the smoking mirror seemed to echo in the sudden, terrible silence of his heart. He was no longer worthy. He could no longer rule. The moral authority upon which his entire kingdom was built had been annihilated. And as the king's spirit broke, so too did his kingdom. The magic began to fade from Tallinn. The vibrant colored cotton withered and grew only a dull plain white. The giant cobs of corn shrank to a pathetic size. The birds fell silent. A sickness of the soul had taken root in the king, and now it spread like a blight across the land. The paradise he had built was now a mirror of his own inner torment. For the disgraced king, there was only one path left. It was not a path of redemption, but one of penance. A path that led away from his throne, away from his city, away from his people. The only path left was exile. There is a grief so profound it can unmake a world. For Suacatl Quetzalcoatl, the shame of his transgression was a living entity, a poison that had not only corrupted him but had leached into the very soul of his golden city. He looked upon the faces of his followers, the Toltecs, and saw not adoration but the reflection of his own failure. He knew he could no longer be their guide. The light of Tallinn had been extinguished within him. He addressed his people one last time, his voice heavy with the finality of his decision. He announced that he must leave. He must travel east toward the rising sun, across the great sea, to a mythic land of wisdom and atonement known as Tlaloc, the land of the black and the red, a name that symbolized the home of writing and knowledge. He was returning to the source, a penitent seeking to cleanse an indelible stain. His departure was not a quiet slip into the night, it was a grand and tragic ceremony of erasure. He could not bear to leave his perfect creations behind to be corrupted or possessed by lesser men. And so he put his own works to the torch. The magnificent palaces of jade and burnished red shell, the houses of silver and turquoise, were set ablaze, their splendor consumed in purifying fire. He commanded his followers to bury his fabled treasures. The intricate goldwork, the masterful sculptures, the caches of precious stones all were returned to the earth, hidden away from the unworthy age that was to follow. And then he began his journey. He did not go alone. A procession of his most loyal retainers, master artisans, the lame, the crooked, the very craftsmen who had made Talon a paradise, chose exile with their king over a life in a city without its soul. Thus began the great and sorrowful exodus from Talon. The world itself seemed to weep in his wake. The chronicles tell that as Quetzalcoatl and his followers traveled, the land was marked by their sorrow. He passed a great, thick tree, and when he rested against its trunk, his sorrow was so great that the tree was forever changed, becoming gnarled and ancient in an instant. At another place, he sat upon a great stone to weep, and the rock, softened by his divine grief, forever bore the imprint of his hands and his seated form. The river he crossed was known thereafter as the river of his tears. Every step of his exile was a scar left upon the face of the world, a landmark of his monumental shame. The procession wound its way across the land, through mountains and valleys, until at last they reached the edge of the known world. They stood at the coast of the great eastern sea, the serpent water, the vast, shimmering expanse of what we now call the Gulf of Mexico. Here, at the precipice of eternity, the king's final act would take place. And here, the legend splinters into two powerful, divergent streams, each offering a different kind of immortality, a different kind of promise. In the first telling, his journey was to be one of final fiery transformation. He donned his most sacred regalia one final time. His mask of brilliant turquoise, his serpentine helmet, and his magnificent mantle of shimmering quetzal feathers. He was no longer the shamed king, but the divine being preparing for transcendence. He commanded a great pyre to be built upon the shore, a pyre of fragrant wood and sacred offerings. And as his followers watched in awe, he cast himself into the heart of the raging flames. His mortal form was consumed, turned to ash by the purifying fire. But his heart, pure and unbroken, refused the flame. It ascended from the pyre, a glowing jewel of light, soaring high into the morning sky. It climbed until it took its place as the brightest object in the heavens, second only to the sun and moon. Quetzalcoatl had transcended his earthly shame. He had become Tlahuizcalpantecutli, the lord of the house of the dawn, the morning star, our planet Venus. He was now a celestial beacon, a constant promise of the coming dawn. But there is another version of the story, a version that would have far more tangible and far more terrible consequences for the world. In this telling, Quetzalcoatl did not seek an end in fire. He sought a continuation across the water. On the shore, he constructed a vessel for his journey. It was a raft made not of wood or reed, but of intertwined living serpents, a magical craft befitting a serpent god. He stepped aboard this living vessel, a solitary figure against the vastness of the sea and sky. He turned to his weeping followers, his loyal Toltecs who remained on the shore, and he made a solemn vow. A promise that would be passed down through generations, seared into the memory of every culture that would inherit the legacy of Talon. He declared that his journey was not an end. It was a temporary departure. He swore that he would one day return. He would come from the east, from across the very sea upon which he was now departing. And he would return in a very specific, fateful year, a Suacatl year in the great cyclical calendar. A year one read the very same name as the year of his birth, the name he bore as king. On that prophesied day in that specific year, he would sail back across the eastern sea, disembark upon the shores of his homeland, and travel once more to the heart of the valley to reclaim his rightful throne. This was not a threat. For the people he left behind, it was the ultimate promise of restoration. It was the bedrock of hope in a world now bereft of its greatest king. It was the sacred trust that the Golden Age was not truly lost, but merely sleeping, waiting for the return of the feathered serpent to reawaken it. For centuries, this prophecy was cherished. The empires that followed, most notably the Aztecs, who revered the Toltecs as their intellectual and spiritual ancestors, held this promise as a sacred truth. They watched the eastern horizon. They meticulously tracked the complex cycles of their 52-year calendar. They waited. They waited for their pale-skinned, bearded god to fulfill his vow. They waited for the coming of the year one read. They waited for the glorious return of Quetzalcoatl. They had no idea that when the prophecy was finally fulfilled, it would not be a god who stepped off the ships from the east. It would be something else entirely. And his return would not be a restoration, but a reckoning that would drown their world in blood and fire. 5 centuries passed. The dust of Talon had long since settled, its golden age a revered memory. But its legacy and its prophecy had been inherited. A new, formidable power had risen in the Valley of Mexico, a civilization of fierce warriors, brilliant engineers, and devout priests, the Aztec Empire. At its heart lay a city that defied imagination, Tenochtitlan, a floating metropolis of pyramids, palaces, and Chinampas floating gardens that crisscrossed a vast lake. It was an engineering marvel, a city larger, cleaner, and more populous than any in contemporary Europe. This was the center of the world, ruled by a man who was more than an emperor. He was a high priest, a scholar, and the living representative of the gods on earth. His name was Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, Moctezuma the Younger. The Aztec cosmos was one of profound and violent duality. They revered Quetzalcoatl, the gentle god of knowledge and creation. His teachings were the foundation of their priestly class, but their tribal patron, the god who had guided them from a mythic homeland to this promised island, was the fearsome Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the south, the insatiable god of the sun and of war. To the Aztecs, the universe was a fragile entity. The sun, their sun, was locked in a constant, desperate battle against the darkness of night. To fuel its journey across the sky each day, it required the most potent nourishment imaginable. Calchihuatl, precious water, the hearts and blood of human beings. The Aztec Empire was therefore built upon a foundation of ritual warfare and mass sacrifice, a practice that their other revered god, Quetzalcoatl, had expressly forbidden. This was the great spiritual paradox at the heart of their world. An empire of ruthless warriors who venerated a god of peace. An empire that practiced industrial-scale sacrifice while holding a deep reverence for the creator who abhorred it. In the years leading up to 1519, this deep-seated anxiety began to boil over. A series of 8 terrifying omens were reported across the empire, portents of a great and terrible change. A column of fire like a bleeding ear of corn appeared in the eastern sky, burning for an entire year. The great temple of Huitzilopochtli, the holiest site in the empire, spontaneously burst into flames, its wooden beams catching fire with no apparent cause. A bolt of lightning on a day with no storm struck a lesser temple, reducing it to splinters and ash. Lake Texcoco, the very water that cradled their city, turned against them. With no wind, its waters began to boil and swell, flooding parts of the capital. Fishermen caught a strange, ash-colored bird with a perfect mirror set into its head. When Moctezuma looked into the mirror, he saw not his reflection, but a vision of stars and then of warriors riding on strange beasts coming to make war. And perhaps most chillingly, the mournful cry of a woman was heard in the streets late at night, a spectral wail, crying, "Oh my beloved sons, we are to be lost. Oh my sons, where can I hide you?" For Moctezuma, a man steeped in mysticism and prophecy, these were not random events. They were a divine language, a terrifying prelude written in the fabric of the cosmos. The universe was warning him. Something was coming. And then news came. Urgent messages, carried by swift runners from the eastern coast. They spoke of things that beggared belief. Floating mountains or towers on the water had arrived from the eastern sea. From these impossible structures came men unlike any ever seen. Men with skin as pale as chalk dust. Men whose faces were covered in thick hair, like the beards depicted on the ancient carvings of Quetzalcoatl. They wore armor of a strange, shining metal that deflected spears, and they wielded fire sticks that roared like thunder, spitting smoke and death. And most terrifying of all, they were masters of giant, hornless deer horses, creatures of terrifying speed and power. Moctezuma was presented with cloth paintings depicting these newcomers. Every detail, every bizarre report, seemed to click into place, forming a terrifying mosaic of fulfilled prophecy. He consulted his priests and his books of fate. The evidence was overwhelming, the coincidences too staggering to ignore. The strangers came from the east, the direction of Quetzalcoatl's prophesied return. They were pale-skinned and bearded, just as the God-King was often described. Their leader was said to be a man of authority and command. And the year was 1519. In the intricate, interlocking cycles of the Aztec calendar, it was the year Suacatl. One read, the exact year that Quetzalcoatl had promised, 5 centuries earlier, that he would return to reclaim his kingdom. Moctezuma, the most powerful man in the known world, was paralyzed. He was caught in a spiritual and political snare of cosmic proportions. Was this truly the benevolent feathered serpent returning to usher in a new golden age? If so, to raise a weapon against him would be the ultimate act of sacrilege, a sin that could unravel the universe. But what if it wasn't? What if this was the trick by the sorcerer god Tezcatlipoca, or another darker power? Or what if impossibly they were just men? His council was fractured. His own brother, the formidable warrior Cuitlahuac, and his nephew Cacamatsin urged resistance. They were invaders, strangers. They should be driven back into the sea from which they came. But Moctezuma, weighed down by the omens and the calendar, hesitated. He chose a different path. A path of cautious piety, of diplomatic appeasement. He would treat the visitors as divine, and in doing so he would test them. He would discover their true nature. The leader of these strange men was, of course, not a god. He was a man of boundless ambition, unshakable self-confidence, and ruthless cunning. He was an obscure Spanish nobleman from Extremadura, a man betting everything on a single, unauthorized expedition. His name was Hernán Cortés. Cortés had arrived with a paltry force, just over 500 soldiers, 16 horses, and a few small cannons. Against an empire of millions, it was a laughable army. But he possessed 2 weapons far more devastating than any cannonball. The first was an iron will and a genius for manipulation. The second was an adversary who was predisposed to believe he might be a returning god. Moctezuma dispatched his most noble emissaries to greet the strangers, and they came bearing gifts. Not the diplomatic gifts of one king to another, but the sacred offerings of a mortal to a deity. They brought the 4 primary sets of divine regalia, the ceremonial costumes of the great gods. And most importantly, they brought the specific costume of Quetzalcoatl. The turquoise serpent mask, the collar of jade, and the magnificent cloak of iridescent green quetzal feathers. They dressed the bewildered Cortez in the vestments of their god. For the Aztec emissaries, this was the ultimate test. Are you the one? For Cortez, it was a moment of stunning world-altering revelation. He may not have understood the specifics, but he understood power. These people were not just giving him treasure. They were offering him a mantle of divinity. And he, the ultimate pragmatist, immediately understood the immense power of that misunderstanding. He would play the part. Moctezuma's decision was made. He would not resist. He would welcome the pale, bearded man from the east, and his strange army, down the Great Causeway and into the heart of his magnificent empire. He would welcome them into Tenochtitlan itself. It was a decision born of piety, of fear, and of a fatal 500-year-old misunderstanding. It was a decision that would open the gates to his own destruction. The prophecy was fulfilled. On the 8th of November 1519, after centuries of waiting, the promise was made manifest. A pale, bearded leader had come from the east in the year 1 read. But it was not the gentle priest-king of Tallinn who marched into Tenochtitlan. It was a man of iron and fire, leading a small but determined army that served as the harbinger of a new and brutal age. The city of dreams was about to welcome its nightmare. The meeting of Hernán Cortés and the Emperor Moctezuma II is one of the most pregnant moments in human history. It was the collision of two worlds, two faiths, two realities, standing on a causeway in the middle of a lake. Moctezuma, robed in splendor, greeted Cortés with the reverence due to a returning deity. He offered flowery speeches of welcome, proclaiming, "O our Lord, you have suffered fatigue, you have endured weariness. You have come to arrive on earth. You have come to govern your city of Mexico." He welcomed the Spaniards into the city, housing them not in common quarters, but in the magnificent palace of his own father Ashiacatl, right in the city's sacred heart. For a time an uneasy, surreal peace held. The conquistadors were dumbfounded by the city's wealth, sophistication, and sheer scale. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortez's soldiers, would later write that they were so amazed they wondered if they were dreaming. But they were also profoundly horrified by the religious practices they witnessed. The temples, the teocalli, were, to their eyes, slaughterhouses slick with the stench and stain of constant human sacrifice. The Aztecs, in turn, were confounded by the Spaniards' bizarre and insatiable obsession with one substance: gold. An Aztec account from the Florentine Codex recalls it with bewilderment. They lifted up the gold as if they were monkeys. They were swollen with greed, and they hungered for it like pigs. The fragile peace was built on a foundation of mutual misunderstanding and suspicion. This delicate illusion could not last. Cortés, ever the pragmatist, knew his position was precarious. He was a handful of men in the heart of a massive, potentially hostile empire. Fearing a trap, he made an audacious and treacherous move. Just 1 week after his lavish welcome, he and his captains marched to Moctezuma's palace, and under the pretext of an incident on the coast, they seized the emperor. They placed him under house arrest within their own quarters, transforming the divine host of an empire into a political puppet. The living heart of the Aztec world was now a prisoner in his own city. The situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came when Cortés was forced to leave Tenochtitlan to confront a rival Spanish force that had landed on the coast to arrest him. He left his most trusted and most volatile lieutenant in command, the red-haired, hot-tempered Pedro de Alvarado. Alvarado was left in charge during the preparations for the great festival of Toxcatl, a major celebration in honor of the war god Huitzilopochtli. The Aztec nobility sought permission for the ceremony, and Alvarado granted it. But as he watched the flower of the Aztec aristocracy, the greatest warriors, priests, and leaders gather unarmed in the great courtyard of the main temple, his paranoia, or his greed, got the better of him. He saw not a religious ceremony but a threat. He gave a terrible order. His soldiers sealed the exits to the courtyard. And then they charged. It was a pitiless, unprovoked slaughter. The Spanish fell upon the dancing nobles, hacking off limbs, running them through with swords and lances. The courtyard, which had echoed with sacred music moments before, now rang with the screams of the dying. It was an unforgivable, incomprehensible atrocity. And in that moment of blood and betrayal, the spell was shattered forever. These were not gods. These were not even men. They were monsters. When the news spread, the city of Tenochtitlan, which had been so placid and welcoming, erupted into a singular, unified wave of vengeful fury. The populace took up arms and the silent streets turned into a war zone. When Cortés returned victorious over his Spanish rivals, he did not find a pacified city. He found a death trap. The Aztecs laid siege to the palace, raining stones, arrows, and spears upon the barricaded Spanish. In a desperate attempt to quell the uprising, Cortés forced the captive Moctezuma to appear on the palace rooftop and speak to his people. But they no longer saw their emperor. They saw a mouthpiece for their butchers. A hail of stones and darts flew from the crowd. Moctezuma fell, mortally wounded, whether by the stones of his own people, or murdered in secret by the desperate Spanish, we will never know for certain. His death marked the absolute point of no return. The prophecy of Quetzalcoatl had curdled into a waking nightmare. The promised return had brought not a golden age, but the massacre of the nobility and the death of their emperor. Under a new, ferocious Tlatoani, Moctezuma's brother Cuitlahuac, the Aztecs unleashed their full fury. On the night of June 30, 1520, the Spanish tried to flee the city under the cover of darkness and a rainstorm. The retreat became a rout. The Aztecs attacked from all sides, from canoes on the lake and from the rooftops along the causeway. The Spanish, weighed down by the very gold they had coveted, were cut down or drowned in the dark waters of the lake. It was a disaster for the conquistadors, a night they would forever remember as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Cortés had been defeated, but he had not been destroyed. He retreated to the friendly territory of Tlaxcala, his most powerful native ally. And though his army was shattered, he had brought an invisible and far more devastating weapon into the valley, an ally that would succeed where his swords had failed: smallpox. The disease, to which the peoples of the Americas had no immunity, tore through the population of Tenochtitlan like wildfire. It was a biological apocalypse. It killed with horrifying speed, wiping out up to 40% of the population in the valley. It claimed the life of the heroic new emperor Cuitlahuac. After only 80 days on the throne, the plague shattered the Aztec command structure and their capacity to resist. In the spring of 1521, Cortés returned. This time there was no pretense of divinity. This was not a test. This was total war. He returned with a rebuilt army, bolstered by tens of thousands of allied native warriors who had long resented Aztec domination. He built a fleet of small warships to control the lake. He laid siege to Tenochtitlan. For 80 agonizing days, the city of dreams became a charnel house. The Spanish and their allies advanced slowly, relentlessly, tearing down the city as they went to fill in the canals. The Aztecs, led by their final valiant emperor, the young Cuauhtémoc, fought with superhuman courage. They fought from every rooftop, from every canoe, for every inch of their dying city. But they were dying of starvation, of thirst, and of the relentless plague. On August 13, 1521, it was over. The last defenders were overwhelmed. Cuauhtémoc was captured while trying to escape in a canoe. The magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, the pride of the Aztec world, fell. The prophecy of return was now complete. A kingdom had been reclaimed, just as promised. But it was reclaimed by foreign conquerors. Its people were slaughtered. Its temples were razed. Its world was systematically dismantled and erased. The feathered serpent had, in a way, returned. But his feathers were the war banners of a foreign king, and his serpent's coils were chains of iron. The promise had become a bloody, world-ending apocalypse. The dust settled. The fires died out. Upon the ruins of the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, a new city was built, Mexico City, the capital of New Spain. The story of the Aztec Empire's fall, and the role of the Quetzalcoatl prophecy within it, became the foundational epic of this new, hybrid world. It is a story of such perfect, tragic irony that it seems almost too literary to be true. A god's promise of a glorious return, twisted by fate into a blueprint for his people's annihilation. For centuries, the narrative was accepted as historical fact, a straightforward account of a fatal misunderstanding. It was a story told with great effect by the Spanish victors themselves. For them, it was the ultimate justification. Their conquest was not merely a bloody military campaign driven by avarice and ambition, it was the fulfillment of a divine providence. It framed their invasion as a preordained destiny, with Cortés as the unwitting hand of God, arriving at the exact moment a local prophecy had foretold. It absolved them of their brutality by wrapping it in the robes of cosmic inevitability. In recent decades, however, scholars have begun to look back at the sources with a more critical eye. They have asked a crucial question: did Moctezuma and the Aztec elite truly believe, with unwavering certainty, that Hernán Cortés was the returning Quetzalcoatl? Or is the story more complex? Many modern historians now argue that the mistaken identity narrative was largely a post-conquest creation, a powerful myth constructed and embellished after the fall by both sides. For the Spanish, it legitimized their rule. For the surviving Aztec nobility, it was a way to rationalize the incomprehensible. It was perhaps more palatable to believe their world was ended by the fulfillment of a divine prophecy than to accept that their mighty empire, the center of the universe, was brought down by a handful of mortal, foreign invaders. It transformed a humiliating military defeat into a cosmic tragedy. They suggest that Moctezuma was not a paralyzed mystic, but a pragmatic, if ultimately unsuccessful, leader facing an unprecedented and technologically alien threat. His divine welcome may have been a calculated political strategy. Honor these powerful newcomers, bring them into his city where they could be observed and controlled, and discern their weaknesses. The flowery language in the offering of sacred vestments may have been the standard, highly formal diplomatic protocol for greeting powerful foreign emissaries, which the Spanish, in their own cultural ignorance, misinterpreted as literal worship. But in the end, the precise historical accuracy of the event is almost secondary to the enduring power of the myth itself. Whether it was a true belief, a calculated strategy, or a post-conquest rationalization, the story endured. It survived because it felt true. It provided a grand sweeping narrative framework for one of the most traumatic encounters in human history. It gave meaning to the meaningless, and order to the chaos of a world's end. The legacy of Quetzalcoatl is, therefore, as paradoxical and multifaceted as the god himself. He remains a being of profound duality. On one hand, he is the enduring symbol of a lost pre-Hispanic utopia. He is the civilizing hero, the god who gifted humanity with art, science, and the calendar. He is the benevolent creator who bled for his children and preached a gospel of peace and self-improvement. He is the morning star, a constant, celestial reminder of the promise of a new dawn. Yet, his name is now forever inextricably entwined with the greatest trauma his people ever suffered. His prophecy, once a message of hope, became an unwitting invitation to his people's conquerors. He is a god of life whose story culminates in the death of an entire civilization. He represents the profound and tragic vulnerability of a belief system when it confronts a force that operates entirely outside of its rules, a force that has no respect for its prophecies, its gods, or its sacred truths. The story of Quetzalcoatl's return is a stark and eternal lesson in how even our most cherished and sacred beliefs can be turned against us, becoming unforeseen instruments of our own undoing. Today, the feathered serpent has not vanished. He is not a dead god of a dead religion. He is coiled in the heart of modern Mexico, and in the identity of its people. He has been reclaimed as a powerful symbol of indigenous resilience, a direct link to a magnificent pre-Columbian past. He is a figure of artistic creation, intellectual achievement, and national pride. The knowledge he imparts now is a cautionary one, a story told in the silent stones of raised temples and in the collective memory of a people who waited for a savior and received a conqueror instead. The feathered serpent remains a potent, living force in the Americas, a timeless symbol of both sublime creation and catastrophic destruction. A god whose promised return became a bloody reckoning, and whose legend serves as an eternal warning, written in the ruins of an empire, about the stories we tell ourselves, and the terrifying power they hold. The fall of the Aztec Empire is a story of immense complexity, and the role of the Quetzalcoatl prophecy remains a subject of passionate debate. But it is in these grand, tragic myths that we find the deepest truths about the human condition, our capacity for faith, our vulnerability to fear, and the devastating consequences when worlds collide. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past with the Eldritch Codex. If you wish to explore more of history's most compelling and mysterious chapters, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell so you never miss an expedition into the forgotten corners of our world. Until next time, keep questioning and keep seeking the knowledge that lies buried in the echoes of time.